The studio lights were brutal hot and unwavering, 100 tiny suns glaring down from the steel rafters above. The air crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on as a silent audience of millions held their collective breath behind screens. Across the country, on stage, the sleek mahogany desk that separated the two figures might as well have been a battlefield trench. Nancy Pelosi sat with her back straight, her fingers interlaced on the desk before her. Her expression was calm, even graceful, but behind those measured eyes was a storm. Across from her, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana adjusted his tie with a quick flick, his lips pressed into the faintest smirk. It wasn't arrogance, it was something deeper, more knowing, like a man who'd been underestimated one too many times. This wasn't just a debate. It wasn't just politics, it was personal. The cameras rolled. "Welcome to the People's Forum," the host said, his voice low and steady, unaware or perhaps entirely aware that he was presiding over what would become one of the most explosive moments in American media history. Nancy leaned in, her voice smooth as velvet and sharp as shattered glass. "Senator Kennedy," she began, "you speak of the Constitution like it's a weapon, but you wield it without honor. You wrap your policies in the language of liberty, but all I see is fear. Fear of change, fear of truth." Kennedy didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled not mockingly, but like a man who saw through masks. "With all due respect, Madam Speaker," he replied, "you speak of truth like you own it. But when the people you claim to protect can't afford groceries, can't afford gas, and can't afford to dream anymore, your truth don't mean much to them." That's when it began. The night would be remembered not for a shouting match, but for a rare, raw unraveling of two powerful figures each confronting not only each other, but themselves. Nancy Pelosi hadn't always been a fighter. Once, long before Washington, before the cameras and the corridors of marble and mahogany, she'd been a mother with a chipped teacup in one hand and a screaming toddler in the other. She learned politics not in committee rooms, but in the chaos of a San Francisco household run like a campaign office. Her father, Tommy D'Alessandro, had been mayor of Baltimore. Her childhood memories were framed not by lullabies, but by city budgets and backroom deals. She learned early that power wasn't given, it was taken, and it was fragile. Still, somewhere inside, beneath the layers of strategy and sound bites, was a girl who once cried when she saw Martin Luther King on the evening news, his voice echoing across a television screen and into her heart like thunder on a quiet night. That girl believed in justice, in people, in the promise of America. But decades in politics had hardened her, and tonight, under these lights, the girl and the speaker stood side by side. John Kennedy, meanwhile, was no stranger to conflict. Raised in Zachary, Louisiana, he grew up surrounded by fields and churches and the smell of wood smoke in the fall. He was the son of a schoolteacher and a Mechanica boy who read Faulkner and Lane before he ever set foot in D.C. What set him apart was that he never wanted to be a politician. He wanted to be a writer. He wanted to tell stories. But life, as it often does, pulled him in a different direction. Law school, public service, and finally the Senate. And yet, even behind the gravel drawl and sharp wit, he sometimes dreamed of old barns and the sound of typewriter keys, of a life not lived in the public eye. The debate wore on, and with each question, the stakes climbed. Pelosi pressed hard on immigration reform, on climate policy, on reproductive rights. Kennedy countered with economic data, rural despair, and government overreach. But something strange happened as the conversation deepened. The masks began to crack. When asked about crime, Pelosi paused, her voice unexpectedly faltering. "Last year," she said, "a close family friend was attacked in broad daylight. We live in a country where mothers lock their doors before noon, and I'm asking myself, have we failed them?" There was no applause, just silence. Kennedy nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. "My brother lost his job during COVID. He drinks more now than he used to. His daughter, she's got epilepsy, and they can't afford her meds. It ain't about red or blue anymore. It's about who can afford to keep breathing." And in that moment, The debate stopped being a performance. They were no longer adversaries, they were weary soldiers in a war neither of them started offstage. Two lives were unraveling in parallel. Pelosi's granddaughter, Ava, had been quietly lobbying her grandmother to step down. "You're tired, Nona," she said over lunch weeks earlier. "You've carried it long enough." But legacy is a hard thing to let go of. For Nancy, politics was not just duty, it was identity. Without the House, who was she? Kennedy, meanwhile, was at war with his own party. He'd started asking uncomfortable questions behind closed doors about campaign finance, about oil subsidies, about the soul of conservatism. Some said he was selling out. Others said he was finally waking up. Back at the debate, the moderator threw the curveball. In one sentence, he said, "What does America need most right now?" Nancy looked into the camera. Her voice was soft. "Grace," she said. John Kennedy turned to her, his eyes unexpectedly glassy. "Mercy," he answered. The clip went viral. Not the insults, not the gotcha moments, but that last 30 seconds. The internet, so often a wasteland of division, paused to breathe. On TikTok, teens stitched their faces over the video, tears in their eyes. On Reddit, veterans and teachers shared their own versions of mercy and grace. Something had cracked open in the country, if only for a moment. That night, Pelosi walked alone through the quiet halls of the Capitol, her heels echoing like distant drums. She stopped at a painting of Abraham Lincoln, her eyes lingering. She thought about the weight of the chair she'd sat in for nearly 2 decades. In Louisiana. Kennedy turned off his porch light and stepped into the humid night. Cicadas sang. In the trees, he looked up at the stars, millions of them, cold and brilliant, and felt something he hadn't in years. Small and hopeful. In the months that followed, both changed course. Pelosi announced she would not seek re-election. Instead, she launched a foundation focused on civics education and mentorship for young women in politics. She spoke at high schools and community centers, not from podiums, but from folding chairs. Kennedy returned to the Senate floor with new bills on rural health care, on mental health access, on campaign finance reform. He worked across the aisle more than he ever had before. And slowly, something shifted. Not in headlines, not in poll numbers, but in people, in how neighbors talked, in how dinner tables quieted to listen, not to argue. In how a nation, frayed and weary, took a step, not toward agreement, but toward understanding. Because maybe that's what the moment on stage had been. Not a battle, but a bridge. And maybe that's what we need more of, not to destroy each other on live TV, but to dare. To speak plainly, vulnerably, and with a kind of trembling hope that the other side might just listen, even if they don't agree. Even if it hurts, because sometimes, when two giants face off, what matters most isn't who wins, it's who's willing to be human. And that night, against all odds, they both were.